The morning sun cut a sharp angle across the kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing over the wooden table. Linda sat motionless, watching the light. Before her sat a heavy cardboard box, its seams sealed with layers of aging tape. For 35 years, she had been a nurse, and this box was the only thing left of that life. She reached out, her fingers pressing into the rough surface, and pulled the flaps back. The smell of old paper and dried ink filled the air. She lifted a stack of photographs, the colors muted by time. Beneath them lay conference programs from decades ago, and thick bundles of thank you cards held together by fraying elastic bands. She pulled one card from the center, the paper soft and worn under her thumb. She traced the handwriting on the front, the ink still legible despite the years. Her heartbeat slowed as she laid the card flat. Each item in the box was a fragment of a life spent in hospital rooms, hallways, and waiting areas. She stared at the pile, feeling the sheer volume of the past pressing back against her. It was not just paper. It was a history of lives touched, crises managed, and long shifts finally coming to an end. She sat in the silence, waiting for the coffee to brew, surrounded by the remnants of a career that still held her attention. The rhythm of the morning shattered when the kitchen door swung wide. Nicole stepped inside, her balance shifting as she carried 2 heavy grocery bags. She marched toward the counter, her focus entirely on the space she needed to clear. She dropped the bags, the sound of glass jars clinking against each other echoing in the quiet room. Her movement stopped abruptly. Her gaze landed on the table, where the box lay open and its contents spilled across the wood. She looked from the pile of paper to her mother. "Mom, what is all this?" Nicole asked, her voice sharp with surprise. She gestured toward the mountain of programs and cards. Linda felt the sudden shift in the air. She pulled her shoulders back, the tension leaving her frame as she let out a short, steadying chuckle. She looked at the scattered documents, then up at her daughter. "Just 35 years of things I could not bring myself to discard," Linda replied. She reached out and flattened a crumpled program, her hand lingering on the ink. She did not look away. She stood her ground, defending the mess as if it were a vital record rather than a collection of forgotten scraps. The kitchen felt crowded now, filled with the presence of the past and the sudden, insistent curiosity of the present. Nicole did not wait for an invitation. She pulled out a chair, the wooden legs scraping against the floor, and sat close to the table. Her hand moved through the pile, pushing aside the thank you cards to reach for a leather-bound volume at the bottom. It was a weathered notebook, its pages thick with entries in precise, black ink. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page, tracking the meticulous records of patient care, medication schedules, and family updates. She turned a page, then another, the sound of paper crinkling in the quiet kitchen. Linda watched her, leaning slightly forward. She had viewed these pages as mere debris, yet Nicole was reading them with an intensity that pulled the room into focus. Nicole ran a finger down a column of notes, noting the level of detail regarding family interactions and medical transitions. She did not look up, her brow furrowed in concentration. To her, these were not just memories. They were a roadmap of complex problem-solving. Linda shifted in her seat, her gaze fixed on her daughter's hands. She felt a flicker of surprise as Nicole traced a particularly dense entry. The silence was no longer heavy with nostalgia, but charged with the realization that these pages held a hidden, functional value she had never stopped to consider. Nicole closed the notebook with a sharp snap and looked up. "Mom, have you ever thought about doing something with all this knowledge?" she asked, her voice steady and insistent. Linda felt the question land like a weight. She shook her head immediately, the movement quick and final. "I am retired, Nicole. The work is done." She reached out to slide the notebook away, her fingers brushing the worn cover. She did not want to revisit the exhaustion of those years. "It is just history," Linda added, keeping her gaze on the table surface. Nicole did not pull back. Instead, She leaned in, her eyes searching her mother's face for a crack in the resolve. "You spent 35 years refining a process.
And now you want to lock it in a box?" Nicole's tone turned sharp, challenging the logic of the retirement Linda claimed as a shield.
Linda pulled her hands into her lap, creating a physical barrier between herself and the records.
"I spent enough time in those rooms," she said, her voice dropping to a low, firm tone.
I put down the badge, the files, and the stress. I am not starting over. The air in the kitchen grew cold, the silence stretching between them as they stood on opposite sides of a widening divide. Nicole did not retreat. She tapped the cover of the notebook, the sharp sound echoing against the quiet kitchen walls. "You did not just do a job, Mom. You were an architect of order." She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the messy pile of papers with newfound intent. "You learned how to comfort the terrified, how to organize absolute chaos, and how to translate medical jargon for families caught in the middle of a crisis." Linda stared at her daughter, the defensive posture in her shoulders beginning to soften. She looked down at the stack of thank you cards and conference notes. Nicole continued, her voice gaining momentum. "You did not lose those skills when you clocked out for the last time. That knowledge is still in you." Linda reached out. If Linda's story feels familiar, stay with us. Subscribe to Senior Tech Simplified and follow the ideas process as we turn years of knowledge and experience into something you can act on. Back at the table, Linda looked through the reminders of her nursing career. What once seemed like old papers now represented decades of knowledge, experience, and lessons worth sharing. The remnants of a life spent serving others. Now, as Nicole pointed to specific entries, the papers seemed to shift in her perception. They were no longer just clutter. They were a detailed map of a career defined by service, a complex language of care that she had mastered. Linda traced the edge of the notebook, the realization dawning on her that the experience she had tried to leave behind was actually the most valuable thing she possessed. Nicole saw the shift in her mother's eyes and moved quickly. She cleared a space on the wooden table, pushing the stacks of paper aside with a decisive sweep of her arm. From her bag, she pulled out a single, stark white sheet of paper and a black pen. She laid them flat on the table, the paper bright against the dark wood. "I found something called the ideas process," Nicole said. "It gives you 5 practical steps for taking an idea out of your head and turning it into something real. It starts with one step. Identify your idea." Before Linda worries about books, videos, websites, or anything else, she needs to answer one question. What does she really want to do? It felt like an accusation. She looked up at her daughter, expecting to see a joke, but Nicole was still waiting. The kitchen silence grew heavy, pressing in on them. Linda reached out, her fingers hovering over the pen but not touching it. Her mind, usually so sharp with clinical procedure, felt suddenly vacant. She searched for a starting point, a thread to pull, but found only the daunting expanse of the page. She looked at the stacks of cards, then back to the blank sheet. Her breath hitched. The transition from a life of following protocols to creating one from nothing felt impossible. She gripped the edge of the table, the silence stretching into an uncomfortable, grinding weight as she struggled to find a single, worthy idea. Linda gripped the pen, her knuckles turning white against the plastic. She did not look at the paper. Instead, she looked at the thank you cards scattered across the table. Her eyes caught a name, then another, and the memories of those faces flooded back. She saw them standing in fluorescent-lit hallways, clutching folders they could not read, eyes wide with the terror of the unknown. She remembered the questions they never asked, because they did not know how. She remembered the insurance forms crumpled in shaking hands. The frustration that had simmered in her for decades finally found its voice. Linda leaned forward, the chair scraping against the floorboards. "It is the chaos," she said, her voice cutting through the room with newfound authority. "They walk into those appointments completely blind. They forget their medications.
They lose track of insurance details, and they are too terrified to ask for clarity. She looked at Nicole, her eyes sharp and focused. I saw it every single day. The system is built for the professionals, not for the people who need it most. They are drowning in paperwork while they should be focusing on their loved ones. That is where it breaks.
I know exactly where the system fails them because I spent 35 years watching it happen. Linda looked back at the pile of thank you cards. They were no longer just paper scraps or remnants of a finished career. They were testimonials of lives interrupted by medical crises.
She touched the corner of a card, feeling the texture of the cardstock. 35 years of holding hands in quiet rooms, of explaining the inexplicable, of guiding families through the darkest hours of their lives.
She realized those years were not merely a sequence of shifts and charts. They were a storehouse of hard-won wisdom that currently sat gathering dust. If she stayed silent, that knowledge died with her retirement. But if she translated that experience into a guide,
the fear she witnessed in those hospital rooms could be replaced by confidence for someone else. The realization settled in her chest.
Steady and heavy. Her life's work had not been about the tasks she performed, but about the clarity she provided to those who were lost. She looked at Nicole, her expression softening from intensity to resolve. Every patient she had helped was a reason to start this new work. The past was no longer a burden to be packed away. It was the essential fuel for her next purpose. Nicole held out the pen, the metal cool against Linda's palm. Linda placed the tip on the crisp, white page. Her first attempt was a long, rambling paragraph about hospital systems and patient advocacy.
She stared at it, frowned, and drew a sharp, thick line through the entire block of text.
The ink bled into the fibers of the paper. She tried again, shortening the words, tightening the focus, but it still felt too broad. Again, she crossed it out, the scratching of the nib loud in the quiet kitchen.
She paused, closing her eyes to visualize the faces of the families she had guided through the fog of illness.
She opened her eyes and began to write, slowly, deliberately. Each letter was formed with intent. She stopped to replace a word, then added another, refining the core of her ambition. When she finally lifted the pen, the sentence stood alone on the page. I want to use what I learned as a nurse to help families organize important healthcare information before they face a crisis.
She pushed the paper across the table. The clutter of the past had vanished, replaced by a single, undeniable direction.
She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally dissipating as the mission stared back at her.
Nicole read the sentence aloud. Her voice was steady, affirming the clarity Linda had finally captured on the page.
Linda sat back, the pen resting on the table. She looked at the single line of text and then at the boxes that had defined her morning. The pile of faded programs and cards no longer felt like a heavy archive of a life left behind. Instead, they were the raw materials for a new architecture of service. She had no website yet, no formal title, and no established office. The lack of infrastructure did not matter. She felt the internal shift from a retired nurse to a woman with a clear objective. The hesitation that had marked her retirement was gone.
Nicole grinned, leaning back as she observed the change in her mother's posture.
Linda felt the tension in her neck vanish, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. "So what do you want to know?" Nicole asked. Linda laughed. "Everything." Nicole smiled. "Good, because that's the next step." Linda looked suspicious. "There's another step?" "There are 4 more. The next one is develop your curiosity." Linda looked again at the sentence she had written. "What does that mean?" "It means we start asking questions."
And that is exactly where we are going next. In the next episode, Linda and Nicole will take this one sentence and start exploring it. Who needs Linda's idea? What problems are they facing? Has somebody already created something similar? What happens if Linda discovers her original idea needs to change? Those questions are part of Step 2. Develop your curiosity. Want to go deeper? Senior Tech Simplified has the complete written ideas process with articles, examples, and resources. Find the link in the video description. Now do what Linda did. Write down your idea. Ask, what do I want to do? Who will benefit? Why does it matter? Turn your answers into one clear sentence. Thank you for watching Senior Tech Simplified. If you enjoyed Linda and Nicole's story, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications to follow their journey. Know someone with experience or an idea they have never pursued? Share this video with them. Then tell us in the comments, what is your idea? Describe it in one sentence. Next up, develop your curiosity. Step 2 of the ideas process. Linda has identified her idea. Now she and Nicole start asking the questions that will shape it. Until next time, keep learning and keep thinking. Your experience has value. Your ideas matter. And sometimes your next chapter begins with one sentence.